Okay, so hello and welcome back to another Unity tutorial. In this video I'll be showing you how we can use Bolt State Machine to help us build a character controller. It currently has support for walking, jumping, falling and sliding, and I'll be sure to add support for climbing and other actions in the future. I hope you're looking forward to it. Let's get started. But first I'd like to thank Admix for sponsoring this video. Admix is a platform designed to help devs monetize their game without interrupting the player's experience by seamlessly placing ads inside the game world. It takes less than 1 hour to get set up, and with no coding required, just drag and drop the ad placements into your game. It's also fully integrated with Unity and Unreal Engine. There's also an online dashboard with plenty of analytics to help you optimize as you go. Check it out by following the link in the description down below. So here we are inside Unity, and I've hit play. I can move my character around, and as you see on the right, we're in the locomotion state because it's blue. And if I was to jump and leave the ground, we go into the falling state, and then when we hit the ground, we go back to locomotion. And then if I was to go up any of these ramps, it stays in locomotion because they're not too steep. They're still within my limit of being able to walk up and down them. But as soon as I step over the edge here, it actually becomes a bit too steep. So if you notice there, it transitions from locomotion into sliding, and then when I reach the end, I go into falling because there's nothing beneath me anymore. And then when I hit the ground, it goes back into locomotion. And you can imagine how I could quite easily hook animation up to this, and I would be able to have a walking animation, and then on here a sliding, and then a falling, and maybe a landed animation. I also have this other big slope here for testing, so I can't try and jump up this slope. I can only jump when I'm on the ground, and then when I actually start sliding down, it turns around to face, going down. And it stops me jumping up, so I can't try and get up that slope. And I've also got the steps here. It supports steps, and I understand steps are built into the character controller. It has something to deal with steps, but it's not that simple when you start adding other stuff like this. When I added the falling state originally, if I walked down the stairs, it would transition between falling and sliding and locomotion as I walked down the stairs, but I've sorted that out now. And same with the slope over here. Usually what would happen is if I tried to walk down the slope, I'd leave the slope, then fall down to it, then leave the slope, then fall down to it. But I actually stick to the slope as I walk up and down. Some of you might be wondering, why not just use Unity's built-in animator for this? But I find that Bolt State Machine is a lot better because you don't have to actually make new scripts for all these different transitions. So normally the Bolt animator is limited to just transitioning off triggers and floats and bools, but with Bolt you can actually write the conditions in here as code inside the transitions. You can also hook up custom logic inside states when you enter and exit them, which you can also do inside the normal Unity animator, but you have to make an entirely new script to do it. And I imagine that if your game has, let's say, 50 different enemies or 100 different enemies, and maybe they all work slightly differently, it'd be a pain to create 100 different scripts, one per enemy. So I think it's a lot better to have each thing, so the player or the enemies, just have a state machine graph that has their custom logic for transitioning. And now let's look into how it actually works. So as I said, I've already done a character controller video before, and it works a little bit like this one does. Let's have a look at the player. So we've got the input binder, I'll show you some of these later, but the important stuff here is the character motor. This is what actually moves the player, and we're only meant to move the player once per frame. So what I do is I store a list of movement modifiers, and down here, whenever we move, I just loop over them all and I grab their value. And this value is just a vector free, and it's how much should this thing move per frame. And in a particular frame, let's say when we're in the locomotion state, we have this walking and jumping enabled. Notice how sliding is disabled. And walking movement, if we look over here, it just returns our input times our move speed. So that's what gives us the normal, walking around movement. And then if we were to look into jumping, this handles checking if we're grounded and if we hit the spacebar key to jump. And if we jump and we're on the ground, then do all this stuff. And it also handles holding down space to jump higher. So we have all that logic in here. And this is also a movement modifier. So when I jump, I can still move midair, and that's because the walking and the jumping scripts are both enabled. So what happens is I'm holding forwards, so it tries to move me forwards, and because I'm jumping, it moves me up or down when I'm falling. So both these are on by default. And then the condition to go between the two is If I'm not grounded, then go to falling. And then from falling, if I am grounded, go back to locomotion. And then in here is when I can add in animations. So I could get reference to the animator on here when I add animation, and I can say play the falling animation or the jumping or the landed animation. When I go from falling to locomotion, it means I've landed on the ground, so I might want some landing animation. Now sliding was a lot more complex. It took me ages to get it to work. The actual logic here isn't more complex. It's just saying, should we slide? And I'll show you that in a minute. But yeah, should we slide? If we should slide, if that's true, then turn off walking, turn off jumping, and transition. And then it's the reverse coming back. So if we look over here, it's saying, should we slide? If we shouldn't slide, and then it checks whether we're grounded or not. So if we should stop sliding and we're not on the ground, then we go to falling. If we stop sliding and we are grounded, then we go back to locomotion. And that helps this whole flow work correctly. So when we're sliding, the sliding movement is on, but these other two, walking and jumping, are off. So it's up to this script to handle all of the sliding movement. And the bool for should slide has some logic here to say, well, if we're on the ground, then do a raycast and figure out the normal vector of the ground. If, for example, the raycast doesn't hit because maybe the direct bottom of our character is over a ledge, then we just use the normal of the previous bit of ground we touched. If we look over here, the motor stores the ground normal whenever it hits the ground. And this code is just various stuff I've come up with over time and have found on online forums and stuff, and I've kind of mashed it all together and fixed bugs and tweaked it and made it work with the state machine to where it all works how it does right now. And I found that just having the separate types of movement in their own scripts and just turning them on and off is actually quite an effective way of doing this, because it means that I can then just make an enemy that, let's say, doesn't have jumping or doesn't slide or doesn't walk for some reason, and I can just remove those particular scripts, and in the state machines I just don't reference them and it works just fine, as opposed to what I've had to do in the past, which is make like separate scripts per enemy. The thing with these separate scripts is that they're reusable. For anything that jumps, I just stick that on it, and in the enemy AI scripts or whatever, I just call jump. And by AI scripts, I mean I can actually use the enemy state machines to handle this. So I can say for the enemy state machine, check if the player's in range, and if so, then whatever, switch to the attack state when I make that. But for now, just for the movement, jumping is pretty simple. Walking is the simplest. It's just literally a vector times by a float. I said jumping's a bit more complex because I've got the ability to hold to jump for longer, and sliding is a bit more complex because it does raycasts and then figures out the ground normal, and it's not that bad. This is whenever we say like movement modifier dot value, this is what happens for the sliding script. And if you remember over in the motor stores all the movement modifiers. It just says loop over them and add on their value. So when sliding is the only one that's enabled, it's just the sliding movement. But then when walking and jumping are enabled, it's both of those added together. And it allows me to just, let's say, make a different kind of movement, like climbing, and then I write all that climbing logic in the script, I stick that script on here, and then I just say turn it on and off when we start and stop climbing. As for the input, if I go to my inputs, controls, we see here I've got this action map, and I've actually set it up for keyboard, mouse, PS4, and Xbox. So if I was to plug in a controller, well, it works with keyboard WASD, it also works with the left stick on an Xbox and a PS4. And looking is either with my mouse or with the right stick on the Xbox and the PS4. And then jumping is either the space key, the A on an Xbox, or the cross on a PS4. And it all just works based on which controller you're using. And that feeds into an input script. So if I look over here, I've got this input reader script, and this one is purely just for dealing with input. So it just says here, jump start, jump cancelled. So that lets me have longer jumps. And when I look and when I try and move, so this is purely just for input, and I'll handle like rebinding keys in here. And these just raise these various events for things happening. And then I've got the input binder, which actually binds, the different inputs to do different actions. So it says over here, based on the camera position every frame, update the movement vector because I move relative to the camera. And I store the movement input whenever I try and move. Whenever I jump, I pass that on to the jumping script. And whenever I cancel jump, I pass it on to the jumping script. So that the jumping script itself doesn't have a clue about my input, which means I can reuse it for enemies. It's not bound to certain keys on my keyboard or on the controller. So theoretically, all of this sliding, walking, and jumping is reusable for enemies, and hopefully the same when I add climbing. So I'll probably do an update video at some point when I make enemies, and hopefully it all works. They should hopefully be able to slide down slopes and walk and jump. And if that all works, then it just shows you the huge benefits to making or writing reusable code. Just saves you time fixing bugs as well, because if you have a bug for your player and you fix it, then it'll fix it for everything else that uses the same script. There's also this other script over here which just sits on the player, and at the end of every frame it just gets the velocity of the character controller and rotates to face it on the X and the Z. Well, it rotates on the Y, but it uses the X and the Z. So the player doesn't rotate to like slide down the slope on their back, they stay up on their feet, and obviously it will look better with an animation, or maybe using inverse kinematics to place their feet on the slope. There's a lot of cool stuff I could do with this project, and it's just something I'm working on in my own time. And don't get me wrong, there's many ways to make character controllers, and I'm not trying to say this is the best that exists, but out of all the ways I've tried in the past, I think it's the best out of those ways, because I've always either written one script that does all the movement, but then as soon as you want some other thing to do movement differently, it's just a pain because you have to rewrite an entire script or use inheritance, and it just gets messy. And I feel like using a state machine makes it so much better, and Bolt state machine is much better than the built-in Unity state machine for doing this kind of stuff. The built-in Unity one is designed for animation primarily, so you still have to use it to do animation, so that's why I would have these running side by side. So I'd have an animation one set up, and this state machine would just call that. So if you imagine that I had an animator, all I'd want to do is go over here, and I'd add in an animator, so animator, add of type animator, and then in, let's say, the falling state when I leave it down here, I could just add in some stuff here and say, well, for the animator, which, because I haven't saved it to the prefab, let's just head back. I need it on here. Animator. Animator. Now, I don't have one, but it's fine. It should still allow me to do all this. So I can drag in the animator, and then I can say over here, like, animator.play. And then all I need to do is pass in the name of the state. Or you can even, set bool. You can still use all the other ways of transitioning. So I could say, okay, just before I trigger the transition, play this animation, and then trigger the transition. So you can do all that. And then over here, I can just say, play the state landing, or whatever landing is. Now, it's gone orange because I haven't got the animator yet. It's still null, but it's just a proof of concept. It's really easy for me now to say, oh yeah, when this happens, also add this in, without having to go in and start writing stuff in these different scripts. So yeah, I think that's it for this video. It was just really a way to show you what I've been working on, and to hopefully maybe give you an idea of how to do your own character controller if you're stuck on that kind of thing. And I know a lot of you voted for this on the poll, so I'm hoping quite a few of you were interested on how to do this with the animator and with the Bolt state machine. I know a lot of you also wanted a video on UI Builder, and I'm still going to do the UI Builder video coming this week instead, so the poll was just to see what people wanted first. And it also does give me time to plan that one out, because it does need a bit more planning. And I'll be showing you how to take a blank project and actually make some UI using the new system from that, so we can build a health bar or a menu screen or just something simple to start off with. Then I can do more complex tutorials after that. So I think that's it for now. Thanks as always for watching. Let me know down below what you want to see next. If you like the video, then please leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and goodbye. But of course, before we go, I've got to thank my Patreon. Special thanks to Kate Incomon, Francisco Lira, Liz Kimber, Luis Ramos, Jake Nixon, Benjamin Hilda, Sam Marcus, Matt Fryer, Malvin, John Salig, David McDermott, Exit, Bidadai, Dustin Miller, Rack, and Yoris Letter. If anyone else is able to help support the channel monetarily, link to my Patreon is down below, as well as links to other social media such as Twitch, Twitter, and Discord. If you guys help us out by following on any of those or checking any of those out, that'd be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.